Welcome to ModPoPLUS for Week 1. It takes us 2 weeks in ModPo to cover Chapter 1. The first week is about the proto-modernist poetry of Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, and then the second week of Chapter 1 presents a selection of poets who follow the Whitmanian or Dickinsonian modes. Here in the first week of ModPoPLUS, we'll look at some new poems by Dickinson and Whitman, that is, poems that are supplemental to the few poems by each that we encounter in the main ModPo syllabus. Our discussion of Volcanoes Be in Sicily is really similar to the discussions we held about the Dickinson poems in the main ModPo syllabus, but here we find a poem that really emphasizes Emily Dickinson's doubts about whether worldly, actual terrestrial, geographical experience is all that people say it is. For her, imagination is itself a kind of experience. It's a profound point she's making here about experience, and although we don't normally think of John Ashbery, he of ModPo Chapter 8, as a Dickinsonian poet, on this point he really did learn a lot from and felt empowered by Emily Dickinson's radical doubts about actuality and about the efficacy of the human imagination. When we turn to a not often read poem by Dickinson, I Never Saw a Moor, M-O-O-R, our emphasis is on the difficulty and oddity and open-endedness of the verse, and that is highlighted by the fact that we have an edited anthology version of the poem. Thus, we compare what Emily wrote against what the editor Edmund Stedman did to alter the poem, so as he felt it would fit properly into his anthology. Then we turn to another Dickinson poem, The Brain is Wider Than the Sky. This poem is something of a sister work to The Brain Within Its Groove, which we encounter in the main ModPo syllabus for Week 1. Whenever Dickinson writes about the brain, about thinking, about mentality, watch out for something very powerful. It's enough to knock the top of your head off, as she herself once said. Be sure to watch the video discussion of The Brain is Wider Than the Sky. It shows me and some ModPo regulars, not the TAs, but ModPo participants, and a few community TAs working together through this poem. Then we revisit Tell All the Truth But Tell It Slant, a poem, of course, we encounter in the main ModPo syllabus. So here in ModPoPLUS, Week 1, you'll reread that poem and then watch a recording of a live webcast discussion of it. It's a portion of a live webcast that we found when we reviewed the webcast recordings, and we're delighted to find a little discussion about this poem that we think adds to it and will edify a second reading for you. Next, we have Dickinson's We Learned the Whole of Love, and a new video recording of a discussion of that poem. Next, a pair of Dickinson poems, She Rose to His Requirement, a poem about marriage, and Wild Nights, a poem that might be about sexual love. And to go with it, a 30-minute audio recording of a Poem Talk episode in which I and ModPo TA Lily Applebaum and 2 other friends discuss both these poems. We also provide you a link to an open public annotation site, and hope that you'll take a moment to click on that link and add your ideas about words and phrases in Dickinson's She Rose to Her Requirement. We don't often link to a site outside ModPo's site, the ModPo site provided by Coursera. In this case, we do so experimentally, hoping that ModPo people will reach out to others who are not in ModPo and encourage discussion, close readings of our poems. And that's what we're doing here experimentally, and we hope that you'll do it, and we'll take a look and see if it's effective. Then we turn to Walt Whitman, and first we provide a brief video recording of a webcast discussion on the topic of the democratic politics of Walt Whitman's form. And then we turn to Whitman's Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking, a poem about formative childhood memory, a poem about the child Whitman pondering love and possibly sexuality for the first time. During ModPo 2013, one of our live webcasts featured 3 poets, our own Julia Block plus Amy King and Tom Picard, talking with me about the poem, And that live event formed the basis of an episode of Poem Talk. And so here you read the poem, listen to the British modernist poet Basil Bunting perform a section of the poem, and then you'll listen to Amy, Julia, Tom, and me talk about it. I'm glad we got Bunting into this, Basil Bunting, because he is one of those non-U.S. poets who connected with the rise of U.S. modernism in an important way. For one thing, he wrote a modernist epic that certainly parallels the American modernist poetic epics such as Pound's Cantos and William Carlos Williams' Patterson and Eliot's The Wasteland, and of course the greatest proto-modernist epic, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. So having Pen Sound's recording of Bunting reading Whitman, pretty rare recording, combined with Tom Picard's personal relationship with Bunting, presents us with a real treat, I think, a happy convergence. 3 more items here in Week 1, Chapter 1 of ModPoPLUS. First, a link to a recording of Susan Howe, a Chapter 9.1 poet, a so-called language poet, and author of My Emily Dickinson, as she, Howe, reads variously from Emily Dickinson on the topic of death. An interesting recording. Second, we have a link, that is to say, in these last 3 items of Week 1 of ModPoPLUS, a link to a recording of me talking about the theme of isolation in Dickinson's poems. And finally, a video recording of a webcast discussion on the relevance of Dickinson's poems here in Chapter 1 to the work of Chapter 9 poets, contemporary poets. Indeed, as you already know from ModPo, Emily Dickinson is considered central to the aesthetics of many contemporary poets.